Russ.
Oh, wow. You hear a recording and everybody gets silent. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gene Jones. Welcome to the 35th Southeast Recycling Conference. If you will allow me, I'm going to make a couple of quick comments, just housekeeping. First off, if I could have everybody put their phones on vibrate and turn off the lights on your phone. Restrooms are just right down the hall. Conference support, if you all have any problems or issues, you can see the front desk out there. We've got Norbert, Dennis, Norbert taking pictures right now, my wife Dana, and then Brittany and Ray Moreau. With regard to the presentations, we will be shooting everything to PDF, and I will be emailing that out to everybody post-event. In addition, we are recording this. That's the one good thing, I guess if you can say a good thing that comes out of COVID, is all of our events now are recorded, so we will be able to provide that to everybody. We will also be providing an attendee list. If you do not want your contact information released, please let me know so we can extract that from the final list. Abstracts and bios, I did send out a compendium of the speakers and moderators, which has everybody's abstract in terms of what they're talking about as well as their bio. So I'm going to ask moderators not to go into great depth in terms of introductions, just to save on time. Networking opportunities, real quick, just the breakouts will take place in the receptions will be in the exhibit hall, so I encourage you to network as much as you can with everybody that's in there. And then for golf for tomorrow, we do have the tournament. Fingers crossed weather's going to hold off for us, so we'll, I guess, check in with us later today or first thing in the morning to make sure that we're still a go for golf. Next thing I need to do is to thank our sponsors, because without our sponsors, I can assure you this conference would not take place. So our Dimer sponsors this year are 4G Recycling, Ocean Recovery Group, Waste Management Recycle America, Southern Waste Information Exchange. Our platinum sponsors are Greif Recycling, Recycle Today Media Group, and then our gold sponsors are Pinnacle, Fibers, Sierra, and Solus. And then lastly, our reception sponsors. Definitely got to thank our reception sponsors. We had Sunoco Recycling last night, and tonight's reception is being sponsored by Accent Wire Tie. And then, oops, I got to go back one. Let me recognize our silver sponsors, Allen Company, AMP Robotics, FV Recycling, Harris, Hustler, KW Plastics, McPreezy, MHS, Pratt Recycling, MachineX, PaperLink International, Strategic Materials, Recycling Management Resources, Recycling Equipment, Lima, and Wilmington Paper Corporation. And then our supporting organizations, these are organizations that help us promote the event throughout the year. We are doing our 50-50 raffle. For those of you that have been coming to SERC for a while will remember that we do this 50-50 raffle at the reception tonight. It'll take place at 6 o'clock. Normally, the winner walks away with about $1,000, so I'm hoping that's going to be the case this year. In terms of the charity, we are raising funds for the Ukrainian Red Cross in light of what's going on in the world right now. And then lastly, quick little announcement for next year. We will be back in Orlando. We're trying to rotate. Haven't signed a contract for 2024 yet, but next year we will be in Orlando back at the Rosen Center. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our moderator for today, for this morning's session, Nancy Womack, who's Director of Accounts and Sales Representative for Greif Recycling. So Nancy, all yours, ma'am.
Thank you, thank you. You know, I kind of want to get everybody to get up and run outside and see if you can grab one person and bring them back in here. Because there's a lot of people out there. Where are they? So thank you all for coming in here and making this effort this morning. And thank you, Gene. Thanks, Gene, for the opportunity, even though you just walked out the door. So I'm excited to introduce this panel today. Gene had a vision when he pulled them together. His vision was that we could talk about the markets, about the industry in general, and what's driving sustainability. So we've got some very distinguished people here, and Bill Moore is going to start us off in just a few things about Bill Moore. I've known Bill Moore for a long time, and probably you all have too. He taught me about 25 years ago that corrugated, when it goes into a compactor, that's still loose. That's not counted as baled. And you know, when I started out working with local municipalities, I didn't know that. So Bill has been around teaching people a lot of the different angles about recycling for years, and he's one person that everyone knows we can depend on that has got the true information of what's really going on with the market. He has one cat whose name is Remy, and when Gene said, you know, ask the moderators not to go into deep detail on the bios, you can read that, but these are things that you really want to know. He has a cat, and he is a live music aficionado. He likes to scuba dive, and he's an auto mechanic. Bill Moore.
Thank you, Nancy, and to the audience. That was the last slide was up. Should I go back? Yeah, take me back to the beginning. So I'm going to talk about the China ban on recyclables, importation of recyclables, and mostly what that effect has been on recovered paper markets. But I thought I would start out with just a couple of generalities. We discussed this yesterday at our workshop. In many ways, the China ban right-sized recycling and the economics of recycling in the U.S., so we have China to thank for that. And they actually said some things like that. One of the 5 things China said they banned the import of recyclables is they wanted to have investments happen in country where the sources of those materials are. Pretty strange objective, but that was one of them. The second thing it did overall was it raised processing fees and shifted the programs away from the market revenue to stand on. And that really enabled the collectors and processors to have a more stable business model. The third thing, and I'm going to just touch on it because Michael Hoffman's going to speak in depth about, it pushed more capital investment into the MRF to make cleaner material. And since the economics were right-sized, the processors of the world were more willing to do that. The third thing is a little more subtle, and it's probably the one negative, was it contributed to the ocean container freight increases and imbalances. When you think of what it was like when China was importing recyclables, the containers were going over with plastics and non-ferrous and paper, and then they'd come back with goods. Well, those containers are not going over anymore. They're going to South Asia, Southeast Asia, India, Indonesia, and they're going back empty to China, and they have to route through South Asia, and that's been part of what the problem has been in the container shipping business. So why did China do this? Well, they didn't want to, it was a bit of greenwashing. You know, the environment in China has lots of problems: air, water, solid waste, groundwater, and they wanted to placate their people. We're not going to take this garbage in from the rest of the world. And they wanted to spur the local collection of recyclables in China, which has happened greatly. You know, the price of mixed paper has been around $250 a ton in China now for 3 years. And I mentioned this third one. They wanted to incentivize other nations to process their own recyclables at home. It was really a strange motivation, but it's clear that that's happening in North America and in Europe also. And most of the things I'll say are about recovered paper, but the plastic situation has been very much a parallel in terms of investment in the U.S. Being caused by the ban. So let's look at pricing impact. So this is the roller coaster ride that we go on in recovered paper, and this is RISI's, Fast Market RISI's basket indicator. We call it the ticker, the RCA ticker. It has low grades, high grades, and kind of a representative set. So this was the last of China's heavy buying back in 2016, and when China first announced the import, we had a pretty strong drop in the market. But then the market said, well, maybe this isn't going to be so real. How could they want to do this? And then when the reality kicked in that they were going to stop importing low grades particularly, the pricing went up in this stretch, but it was mostly due to high grades. And then here, both the high grades and low grades stopped going into China, and we had a real drop. And 2019 was a really bad year, almost the worst year I've seen in the recovered paper business. And then COVID actually kicked in here and constrained supply, and we had a real jump up when the coronavirus cut down commercial supply. And then the market got overheated a bit and retreated. And then this is where the new demand for recovered paper started to come in North America. And you can see we really jumped up. And as it does, the market gets a little overheated and it starts to correct. And that takes us up to about where we are right now. So when we look at the long-term annual mixed paper price, noteworthy is 2019 at a real value of -2 U.S. average FOB all throughout the country, really unprecedented. You have to go back to the early 90s to get numbers down in the $15 range. And this was kind of an oversupply situation. And when China started to buy big in 99 and 2000, and you can see the recession years of 2001 and 08, 09 dipped down. This was not a recession year. The economy was pretty strong. And this was China buying real heavy in the 80s. And this was the last time China bought mixed paper, and that big drop, and then the slingshot back that occurred last year. So global flows, how have the global flows changed of recovered paper? There's a couple of key takeaways here. One on the bottom, in the US, you can see we were kind of holding pattern in the mid-30s in terms of million tons usage. And you can see it's going to go up a fairly significant amount, 5 million tons of new capacity coming in over the next 5 years. China, you can see in the green, actually is going down. They have some shift away from recovered paper, and I'll talk about that. But also their total capacity to produce paper boards and container boards has been static. Other Asia in the brown here is growing also. You can see they're going to add 15 million tons of new capacity. Europe is fairly static. They're pretty well built out. And then the rest of the world is actually increasing a fair amount too. And when we look at the redistribution on this chart, I'm not going to go into all the details, but if you look at the numbers, you can see how the Asian shift from 2012 went to 2020 and the repositioning of recovered paper supply around the world. So what happened inside China? So they have substantially higher OCC and mixed paper prices than anywhere in the world, which is great for the collectors, processors. The major integrated paper companies now own their own collection and processing infrastructure. But it was not good for the paper mills. The paper mills in China are paying higher fiber costs than anywhere in the world. And the recycling, collection, and processing is booming, but local OCC and mixed paper fiber is inferior. Their local OCC is so highly recycled that it has a lot of short fiber, and they used to depend on US and Canada for high virgin content container boards. So strength-wise, they have some real problems in making their boards. And their container board and corrugated box prices have gone up, especially for export. They're paying above world pricing now. And the last one I mentioned was on the container freight. Not only did the container shortage occur because of this rerouting of containers, but their outbound head haul container costs have gone up, which increases their freight, and they're a very export-dependent economy, so that's really hurting them. So here's a chart which looks at the sources of recovered paper for China. If we go back to 2000, which is really the first big year of buy, you can see domestic is in the dark, and recovered paper imports green or in green. And you can see that went up fairly sharply for about 15 years and then leveled out for a couple of years. And they did certainly grow their domestic collections there also. But you can see as we go post the ban, we went down to, and it's essentially zero in 2021. And you can see the numbers, they've gained a fair amount of domestic here, but then they actually slid back a little bit in 2020. So what are the Chinese paper mills doing? What were the alternatives if they can't import recovered paper? I touched a couple times on increased domestic, but there aren't enough boxes in China for recovery. They're actually maxed out on corrugated recovery, and they went from being not so maxed out to maxed out in 5 years. But think of it, they have a lot of their boxes that they're making go overseas. pulp. They're using more unbleached craft virgin pulp, which they get from places like Canada, Siberia, Chile. Nine Dragons started up an unbleached craft pulp mill in Maine, and UKP, unbleached craft pulp, is a fairly small grade, not like the bleached pulp grades around the world, but the capacity is tripled to make unbleached craft pulp, almost strictly shipment to China. The converters, the people who make boxes, are buying linerboard and medium on the global market outside of China. And that didn't occur for about 15 years in China, and starting in 17 and 18, they started to buy board on the world market. Actually, you could buy it at lower cost than you could produce it in China. And there's some import of recycled fiber pulp. Nine Dragons, again, has 2 units here in the U.S. There are a number of units in South Asia, but it's still a small part of the picture. And China's got wood projects now. There were virtually no wood-based paperboard mills, containerboard mills in China, and there are a dozen wood-based projects, and they're growing pine trees to supply that. And actually, the biggest piece of the solution is they're switching over to use wood. And there's been some increase in alternative fibers, wheat straw, bamboo, bagasse, but mostly good just for medium, the curly layer in the corrugated box, which can use lower quality fibers. You put all these together, and that's how they've solved their fiber problem, and it's really been a challenge to the paper makers. So changes caused by the ban to the U.S. I mentioned the reshoring of manufacturing. We've got some of that back, and we've certainly got a lot more corrugated box demand. And then the MRFs producing better quality mixed paper and OCC. So here's the chart of recovered paper exports from the U.S. to China. We peaked out close to 16 million tons a year in the middle teens, and it's a steady ladder down to almost 0 in 2021. And when we look at all grades of recovered paper here, this is recovered paper export versus domestic demand. When China was a big buyer, our percentage of exports was going up. We leveled out in this time frame, and this is China coming out. And last year, though, we actually increased our exports. That was a little surprising to me. I thought that number might go down, but we think going forward, it does go down. We're always going to export some recovered paper from the U.S., so we have good quality material, and if you're located right near a port, 25, 50 miles, export's probably going to be the best option. But I've been in the export brokerage business, and you always shake your head and you say, did you really make any money after the claims and the port delays, et cetera? So with all the new domestic demand coming, we expect to see a shift which has less export and more going to the domestic mills. So by grade, mixed paper at its peak when China was really buying, we called it an export grade. It was almost 60% of mixed that was produced in the U.S. when export. Last year it was 45%, and it was down. It was only 32% in 20. And again, a little bit of a surprise for us, but we see there will be a shift go to domestic. The news grades, SRPN and ONP, 60%, very export grade. There's almost no usage of low-end ONP in the U.S. Because we just don't have any newsprint mills that have recycle capability anymore. OCC, 36% export, again, up from 30% in 20, which the largest users were India and Vietnam. Pulp substitutes, converter scrap, India and Mexico were the largest users. And the de-inking high grades, like sorted office paper, went up a bit in 21, but Mexico and Canada are export locations for the U.S., so most of that stayed in North America. This pie chart shows the big change. Here's OCC exports by destination, 18 versus 21. You can see there were 2 million tons less export, and in 18, China had 49% of it, and in 21, they're not even in the pie chart. You can see India grew from 15 to 20%, Indonesia 5 to 12, Malaysia, which was in the all others, is a significant buyer, and Thailand, which was in the all others, really increased their buy. And this bar chart shows the domestic use of OCC increasing over the last 3 years while the exports went down. And if we look at how we're using it, this is over a 10-year period from 2011 to 2020, we produced 3 million new tons. Containerboard share went from 40 to 55, and export dropped from 35 to 30. There are 6 new containerboard machines using recycled fiber. They're going to come online over the next 3 years, 5 in the US, 1 in Ontario. There are 4 other possible/probable machines, and these new machines will almost all use OCC as their primary fiber, but some will use mixed paper also. And they're all aimed at the corrugated box business, which is growing in the US for the first time in quite some time. For 20 years, from the late 90s to the early teens, the corrugated box business declined in the US, and since e-commerce has started to become a reality, and with the pandemic, the boost up, the corrugated box business is as good as it's been in 30 years. In mixed paper, I was a little surprised when I put the stats here that really our usage of mixed paper has been fairly static domestically. You can see the exports coming down, and we lost some tonnage of mixed as programs got out of mixed paper when it had no value. But I expect to see this number add another 1 million tons of mixed usage over the next 5 years. Other countries' acceptance of mixed paper. Other countries in Asia said, well, if this stuff isn't any good for China, why should it be good for us? And indeed, Vietnam is going to stop the import of mixed, and Indonesia and India are cracking down on prohibitive and the quality. And the latest country to announce a ban on imports is Malaysia, where a lot of Chinese companies have relocated their businesses and put new machines in, and they're fighting with the Malaysian government. Now we can't bring mixed paper in. And all of those 4 countries are the largest import locations. So there's a consensus in Asia that we're going to see either 0.5% or 1% prohibitives limit on any imports of mixed, and that's very difficult to meet from residential MRFs. But the North American domestic mills are in a much better position to use mixed paper, even if the MRFs only get down to the 2 to 4% prohibitives level. High grades, China was not a large user of high grades. They haven't done any recycled tissue capacity in 15 years, but the overall effect of China pulling out of the market affected that also. There is a little bit of recycled tissue in the country in China, and they stopped the imports of that. But the SOP market has remained strong, largely because we're not printing documents anymore, and particularly during the pandemic, supplies were very tight. So I thank you for your attention, and we'll pass it over back to Nancy.
Thank you, Bill. So we've heard about the market. We're going to hear about the industry now from Michael Hoffman. He's the Managing Director and Group Head of Diversified Industries Research with
Stifel.
Stifel.
It's German, the I's and E.
Nicolas and Company. So here's some interesting things, because these gentlemen have a very diverse background, and you know that they are really in tune with what they're doing on their business because they've got so many activities outside. So Michael is an equestrian. He owns 6 horses. He's got 2 Jack Russells, but here's the most exciting thing. Last week, are you ready for this? He got his first hole-in-one at the Red Course at Stream Strong, Florida, which is one of the top 50 public courses. So now he's going to demonstrate his reaction to when he realized it was a hole-in-one. All right, come on up, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I have to admit, if you play golf, that is one of those things you think you'll never do, and then when you do, your knees go weak. So I do these speeches a lot, and usually it's just about what the state of the industry is. And this year, I've added a little bit of a dimension of looking forward and trying to talk about some key issues that are also facing the industry. I'm going to talk about the state of the industry, but I also want to talk a little bit about why is the stock market beating the snot out of the industry at the moment. So, who's managing money in this country? So I'm a baby boomer. I'm having conversations with millennials predominantly now, and a little bit of the X generation. So they're 35 to 50. So take 15 years off of that. If you're 35, you're 20, or a junior in college, and when you've started your career. So if you think back 15 years of what's been happening in the U.S. economy, no inflation, no interest rates. I mean, they're basically money was free. So these are people who are managing money who've never actually seen rising rate environment or an inflationary environment. Well, now let's add in, they're living through the equivalent of the Spanish flu, 1930s European aggression, 1970s energy crisis, and 1980s hyperinflation all at once. So you can imagine they're a little bit confused. There's also been thematic shifts going on. I think that accounts for what happened in January. But then we get into, it starts the earnings season, which is the end of January all the way through to actually this week. And the issue around inflation rates and then the geopolitical all start to weigh on the market. And on inflation, increasingly the marketplace doesn't believe when companies tell them they can price it through. They want sort of incremental proof, even though the garbage industry was able to prove in 2018, when there was a period of rising wages, and then those who do a lot of shipping, remember shipping rates popped in the spring of 2018, and the garbage industry actually priced that through real time. If you looked at their February 18 guidance and then February 19 reported results, saw a fairly significant gap up in the reported price. So they came into the market real time and priced it through. Despite that point of evidence, they're doubting that they can do it. Now, rising rates, I can't believe after 35 years I still have to fight that garbage isn't a bond proxy. But the flip side of that is that we are so far behind on what we're supposed to have done with rates. I mean, quite frankly, Janet Yellen should have done this in 2011. That the real fear is you're going to create a recession. That if you taper at the pace that would need to be done to slow demand, to reduce inflation, that you actually tip the consumer into a recession. And then we haven't even talked about what's been happening geopolitically to exacerbate the inflationary environment. What happens in that scenario is the market, again, despite all my efforts over 35 years to convince them you're supposed to focus on price, the only thing a garbage company actually controls every day is price. If you think about it, you're all in the business, the volume always goes away, always finds a home. If you want to track more volume, the only way you can do that is you lower price. Well, when you're done, everybody has the same amount of volume and you all got paid less. So you really don't pay attention to volume in the main, and yet they're fixated on slow the economy down, there goes volume, oh, that's bad for garbage. And we remind them continually, it's a service-based industry, it's service-based revenues, but that's what I'm fighting. And then lastly, one of the competitors on the public side on February 2nd let the market think that there was no opportunity to reinvest money back into garbage, and they were directing it to other avenues of accelerated growth. They really didn't mean that to be their message. I've clarified that with the company, that there is plenty of consolidation left. They just feel that the valuations had gotten so high that they'd let the market cool, redirect money to other sources of growth, driving, improving returns. But that doesn't mean there isn't ongoing consolidation. And over the next 4 weeks, all the other garbage companies said, yeah, there's lots of M&A. And there's 30 billion in the industry still independent, 8,000 companies. So, and then the geopolitical. We're going to get into more details about this, but I'm back to Spanish flu, European world aggression, energy crisis, and hyperinflation. What are you to do if you're managing money? A couple things I want to touch on that I think are important. The multiple compression. So the other thing that the market wanted to talk about is, that this is an industry, they love looking backwards on data. And so they look backwards on data over 20 years and they realize that the market multiples were down in the 8 to 10 times, and we've been living in the 14 to 20 times, and oh my God, there's this extraordinary multiple expansion, has to re-rate. And my comment would be that if stock markets truly are somewhat efficient, then they discount future free cash flows. That's a mouthful. Garbage industry prints cash. It compounds it at 5 to 10% a year, depending on the company. The cash conversion of the industry, meaning percent of revenue, EBITDA, I don't care which multiple you want to use or ratio you want to use, but the cash conversion has improved dramatically. This is a far better operated industry than it has ever been. The slope of that line has outpaced the slope of the enterprise value improvement. And yet we are re-rating. So ultimately what's going to happen, we're going to get into the first quarter by the 3rd of April. They're going to report better price, better volume than the market expects. They're going to have really good cash conversion, and everybody's going to wake up and go, I didn't expect that. And you'll see them come back. they've actually started to perform better, all but one company who's a little bit of in a penalty box more psychologically than fundamentally, because they're defensive, and we are having what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine, so the market's shifting back towards some defensives. Let's talk about housing a little bit. Garbage is not a first derivative housing play. I mean, yeah, sure, we all love the C&D box coming in, but what it really is a second derivative of, if you build enough houses, then some entrepreneur is going to figure out that there's too many people trying to get a donut at Dunkin' Donuts or the coffee at Starbucks, and they'll go build another one. And in the past, you'd have a commercial construction cycle go with that. Now, I'm not sure that happens, but there's lots of empty storefronts. You fill the storefront, you put a box in the back. That's new business formation. What you follow on that data is if you're at 1 million housing starts, you get new business formation. Well, here's some fascinating things to remember. Is that it? There we go. Okay, that's pre-Great Recession. That's the bottom of the Great Recession. The gray is the recession. Blue is an industrial recession. So we've got another mild recession. That's the pandemic recession. But look here's your million line right there, approximately. I realize these are lots of little numbers. So there's about where your million line is. So look at that long, long period of not being at 1 million. I don't have the prior chart, but if I put up my 60-year chart, every other economic cycle, the housing cycle, recovers dramatically fast, sometimes before the business cycle's over. This did not happen. So you did not get that volume driver of new business growth, the new container coming into the business, and you're running public companies. What are you going to do? I'm back to the price issue. So they did two things in this period, the garbage industry. They figured out how to turn their assets a lot smarter, and they relearned the power of price. I believe today that most companies, public or private, realize that they're better off the truck 80% full at 100% price than in the old days of fill the truck at the expensive price. And that's a new lesson learned, and it bore itself out through the pandemic. But then what happens here in 14, 15, you get over 1 million, you start to see the rise in housing. Well, if you go back and you look at the performance of the stock market and the garbage industry, exceptional period of improving profitability and cash conversion, highly correlated to discipline on price, asset utilization, and then this new business formation. Then you get the pandemic dip right through here. Interesting enough, it peaks at 1.6, drops to 900,000, and quickly comes back to 1.6. We've been at 1.6 now for the last 18 months. Natural demand is 1.5. This period through, this period through here, we're at 1,230,000. This is going to be fascinating. This is your canary in the coal mine. Watch what the consumer does here. Will the Fed push them out of the housing market because they'll get mortgage rates too high? I'm not sure they do. You got to watch that. But if the consumer is willing to support this, and we stay at 1.6 million, then we're going to be okay, I think. But it's something to watch. Then the other is back to the new business formation. So this is business applications. You can see this coming into the Great Recession, acceleration, then a massive plummet, and then if I took this piece out here, this slope of this line looks a little more apparent, but you can see there's a clear positive slope, the pandemic, and then a massive spike. We estimate 2/3 of this is e-commerce. It's influencers, so it's never going to have a box on the back. But there's a certain percentage of it is new business formation that has a box in the back. We don't think the new business formation has peaked. But now we got to talk about household savings rates. Red, around 9%, 8.8 of disposable income. That's the long-term average. Pandemic happens, this is the pandemic pulled out for you, but the pandemic happens, we spike to 35, that's not realistic, but we settle into the high teens, middle to high teens, or actually low to high teens, double digits. And it holds there all of the second half of 20 through the first half of 21, and then do all of you remember when you realized, oh my goodness, it cost a lot more to fill my tank? It was beginning in July of 21. So just to be clear, that's way before Russia. It's beginning in July of 21, you start to see a spike in inflation, and look what happens to the savings rate is it drops down into the 7s. We're very low here. Consumer debt is up. This is a concern, got to pay attention to that. Next item, consumer sentiment. So pretty, you think about, here's the Great Recession, kind of bounces along here, but then improves. You want to be above the red line. It improves and holds on for a long time, really healthy numbers in the 80s. Then, of course, plummets around the pandemic, but lifts. You know, think about your own behavior. The minute you were told you could get out of your house, what did you do? You got out of the house. And then you went and did things, and you know, social distancing and everything, but we figured out how to socialize again. By the way, that drives business activity, and then every time you and I go out and do something, it creates a garbage event, but it helped catalyze a new business formation. But look what's happened here. It has plummeted. Now, it's plummeted for a lot of reasons, but the inflation's at the top of it. I'm not here to make political commentary, but in the fall on this data, across the board, didn't matter whether you were red, blue, politically, gender, religion, creed, race, didn't matter. Every demographic group started having doubts about what was happening in Washington, and now what you've seen is just increased level of concern with regards to inflationary environment. I've been on the road for like the last 2 weeks, hadn't filled my car until 2 weeks ago. I filled it, drove where I was driving, filled it before I went to the airport yesterday. 2 weeks ago, I could have filled my car for about I drive a Subaru Outback, for about $45. I filled my car for $65 before I drove to the airport. That is hugely regressive to our economy. Fascinating. Vehicle miles traveled, our driving did not change through the 5-6 months, July to December, January. Don't have real-time data yet to see if we're going to change our driving behavior given where it is right now. We kept driving on the first round of this inflation. Not sure if we're going to keep driving on the second round. We have to watch that. Okay, so where are we now in the garbage industry? The quick and dirty on that one. State of garbage is really good. Everybody who's in it, I think, would probably pretty much say, yeah, business is pretty good. I mean, I'm scared to death of the macro, but the underlying business is not bad. I've been in numerous trade shows or vendor events where I'm talking to the vendors, and every one of them said, we're sold out. Now, we're sold out on two levels. One, if you're selling trucks, you can't get chips, so you're sold out for that reason. In fact, the truck side of the industry has walked back production to meet its own ability to deliver. They're not making and parking and then finishing and then shipping. They're only making and shipping. But everybody, the container folks are sold out. Everybody's sold out. That's how good demand is. I think we'll see in the first quarter numbers that volumes prove to be better than a fairly conservative view of volume by the industry. So two things, price, volume. That's what everybody pays attention to first. The price number was up meaningfully in February of 22 guidance versus what the February 21 starting number was. It shows all year long they raised price. So the base that they were coming into 22 was high enough to be able to sustain a pricing level. I'm absolutely convinced garbage can price through inflation. There is one company out there got caught a little behind on cost, rising faster than their ability to price. They'll catch up by the fall. Again, that spooked the market because it's the biggest player. But they will, in fact, catch up by the fall. On the volume side, the market was a little worried. Well, that was kind of conservative. I think the industry is being prudent. You can't predict when the entrepreneur is going to put the box behind the storefront. So don't get in front of the pace of new business formation. So the underlying volume number basically matched what the natural generation of volume is around the economy or population growth. And then on inflation...
Recording in progress.
All of them stated, bar the one, that they could cover inflation right out of the box, their own internal cost of inflation right out of the box, and the one will catch up by the fall. And then lastly, because the big company suggested there was less M&A, and then the second biggest company has spent $3 billion in the first 9 months of a new CEO's tenure buying industrial waste businesses, of course the market said, oh my goodness, there's no more consolidation in solid waste. Well, that's not true. I mean, the others all got out there and showed they'd either closed deals already in the beginning of the year, and even number two said, I got $550 million to spend in my guidance for solid waste M&A. So the M&A cycle is still robust. I don't think it's going to be as strong as 21. That was the best year we'd seen ever ex big deals. We spent over $4.5 billion spent buying garbage companies. But I think it's still going to be healthy. It won't have an underlying tax driver. I think, quite frankly, it's just getting harder and harder to do the business, and family-owned businesses are looking at good valuations and realizing, I'll let somebody else worry about this labor issue or passing through this inflation. Okay, let's talk about the future. That's for all of you who don't know that, that's a PFAS compound. So PFAS cannot be ignored. If you're in the garbage business at anywhere along the food chain, you cannot ignore this. Good news is I think the garbage service companies, and specifically the landfill operators, have been in front of this for a while. This is not going to be the recycling repeat of the 80s where they went, oh yeah, sure, I'll add that to the bill. Never really thought about it as a business, and 30 years later woke up to, it could be a really good business, but we got to be out of the commodity business. And I'll talk about that in a minute too. So a couple of things just to keep in mind. EPA has to promulgate its rules. You can't, without a set of rules, nobody really is going to go and spend a lot of money. They basically gave their blueprint of that plan last October. It's basically late 23, early 24, you'll get final rulemaking. What I need is an MCL. What is that? Maximum contamination limit. So gory detail, in 2019, Congress puts in the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the big giant bill. This is the $1.5 billion thing that just got passed the other day. The giant bill that covers funding for defense. They stuck in it that the EPA was required to set a preliminary parts per trillion number. So they did. A year later, it came out, it was 70 parts per trillion. It sort of rated that as the baseline. About half a dozen states have been much lower, focused on drinking water in high single, low double digits parts per trillion. I think at the end of the day, where we're going to, I think, based on all the people I talked to, somewhere between 20 and 40 parts per trillion is probably where EPA lands. And with that, then lots of things can happen. Between the drinking water side and the cleanup side, action will begin. But here's a really interesting observation. There's some cynics go, oh, this is going to drag on for decades. Military bases, airports, and firefighting training centers are all public assets. They're not corporate assets. They're not going to have general counsels fighting in court forever and ever and ever to resist having to pay for it. This is all public money. If you talk to the water treatment operators, whenever we have major rainstorms, they always have a spike in their PFAS levels in their sludges. If you go upstream from where that rainfall came down, it, generally speaking, went through an airport, a military base, or a firefighting training center. Why? Because all three of them have firefighting foam, and firefighting foam is a PFAS compound. Start there, you'll spend $20 billion in cleanup. Now, what do you do with this? Here's something that's interesting. We cannot destroy this yet. Lots of conversations about thermal angles on this. We've got a lot of work to do there. Ultimately, somebody will figure it out, and they can maybe destroy it and not create something that's worse through the air pollution side. But there's no question you can get it out. That's absolutely irrefutable. You can get it out of whatever it's in. So what are you going to do with it? Well, this is where the garbage industry shows up, in my opinion. You're a natural closed loop, because anybody who's in the landfill business, it's easier for you to go, yeah, no, he's right. But this is an extraordinarily sophisticated civil engineering asset, is a modern Subtitle D landfill. You can contain this. This could be closed loop. And there's a symbiotic relationship between publicly owned treatment works and solid waste. And so my biggest fear is the states move faster than the federal government. They treat landfills as a generator. They're not, they're a concentrator. And as a result, you get weird things coming out of that. Ultimately, that gets passed through in price. But I think the bigger issue is that public owned treatment works are no longer going to be land farming their sludges. What are they going to do with them? That's where the landfill operator comes, and then do you end up in that symbiotic relationship? So I think that's where we're going, but regardless, there's a long-term play here. I think PFAS looks like PCBs from a business standpoint. This is going to be the gift that keeps on giving from a revenue standpoint for 20 or 30 years once we get the rules. Okay, emissions. If I sleep well, pretty well, all things considered. Being a baby boomer, at some point in your life, you get up multiple times at night. But other than that, what wakes me up in the middle of the night about the industry is this. It's landfill emissions. And it's not just because in the last 5 years, all of you now can go, oh yeah, no, I've heard of this thing called environmental social governance or sustainability. It's not something that's, and not because you're in the recycling industry, you've heard about it in mainstream conversations. It goes beyond that, in my own opinion. The garbage industry has an emissions issue. It's not their trucks. 90% of their emissions issues, if you're integrated, is the landfill. There's no question a modern landfill generates gas, but nobody's fighting that. Here's your problem, is that the way EPA comes up with the numbers for this is not a measurement, it's a calculation. Or worse, that calculation penalizes you for being better at collecting the gas. Every time you put a well in and penetrate the cap, they presume that it will create fugitive emissions. They have a formula for what that is, and they then presumptively say you're generating more greenhouse gases. And the measurement or the calculation is about the fugitive emissions. It's not about the total gas generation. My fear is the garbage industry is moving way too slow about gaining control of this. So, piece of minutia, 2 years, 3 years, what are we in, 22? 4 years ago, the National Jet Propulsion Lab took a satellite, flew it over the coast of California, and came back and wrote a report and said that garbage landfills in California are super emitters and they're far exceeding the levels at which EPA has documented. There was massive flaws in their approach. One, it was a single day. There were weather sources that they used to calculate what the wind effects were 25 and 50 miles away from the landfill. And you can't take a single point estimate and then come up with an absolute conclusion. The garbage industry has to figure out how to do day-to-day or frequent data collection, establish the data, and not be afraid of the data. You are a emitter of greenhouse gases. It is a given. Figure out what the real number is and then figure out a plan on how you're going to reduce it. That's what you need to do. And by the way, you'll be able to pass through these costs because it won't happen to you overnight, but do not lose control of this subject. I worry that we will. We have about 2 years. And then I think somebody else is going to come in and they're going to say this is the new way. And it won't necessarily be the feds. The feds are moving far too slow. Last item, all this renewable gas movement does not lower your emissions. It's a great thing to do. It's great economics with the RIN prices, even at $2 on a RIN versus $3.50 where they are today. It's something very economically sensible to do, but it does not lower the emissions the way emissions are calculated. Okay, recycling. So I'll fill in the back end of Bill's conversation, share an anecdote. Can't prove this. I have been told repeatedly that China in 2017, when they promulgated the plan, National Sword, there was a typo. It was supposed to be 5%, not 0.5. Can you imagine how different the world would be if it really was 5%? All right, let's forget that for a minute because I can't prove it. A lot of people have told me that. So there's approximately 800 MRFs in this country. Most of them, vast majority of them, are at least 15 to 25, somewhere in the 15 to 25 years old. So think about it. You're all in the recycling business. What the composition of the waste stream looked like then versus what the composition of the waste stream looks like today. It's predominantly newsprint. Today it's got a lot of corrugated and then mixed waste. We designed these things so the belts were narrow. You covered the belt, lots of people, negative sort. That whole model doesn't work today. There's a massive recapitalization that has to happen. A couple things that are really fascinating is technology has caught up. You have optical sensors now that really truly can get down to an RF frequency on chemical compounds. So we now have a legitimate conversation about polypropylene. I was at the Northeast Recycling Conference, their group conference about 4 years ago. There was a terrific group out of, I believe they were Alabama, and they pushed back on me about polypropylene. At the time, you couldn't get it out. Now, they had a nice little business, but you couldn't get it out at the volume you can get it out today. The technology has changed. You've now got a redesign going on where the belts are much wider, lots of black space, take people out. So here's the critical industry issue for the industry. We're in the 100 to maybe as high as 200, but low 100s is your processing cost. Your commodity book, okay, in 21 it looked like it was over, well, in the 140s to 150s, but you ought to assume the commodity book lives at around $100. That's just the balance between paper, plastics, cans. Wish the glass wasn't in there, but it is. Glass. What's that balance look like when you add up the book? if you can think about it at $100, and I'm not in the commodity business anymore, 60% of the 50% of the volume in the country goes through the garbage industry, the big garbage industry's infrastructure, and 60% of their volume has been converted to a process fee, and they'll just work through their contracts to finish the remaining 40% over the next 3 to 5 years. We're manufacturing now. The MRF is a manufacturing facility. It's got a processing cost per ton. You got to get that processing cost below $100. The biggest piece of that is labor. The second business piece would be yield, the speed through, and then you've got to reflect on the quality, because we are really in a circular economy now. There is a very legitimate commitment. I believe we are starting to see honest commitments to content by the Consumer Packaging Group, the acronym CPG. You see CPG everywhere. I think there's true legitimate commitment to content. So they need reliable feedstock. It has to be really clean from a standpoint of prohibitives. That's a new word. I learn something new every time I go to, I always call it contamination. So prohibitives, you got to get the prohibitives out. Yeah, there's a $3 to $5 billion investment has to be put into these MRFs to do that. I think big garbage will do that. I've repeatedly talked about that. I think big garbage is the solution to the long-term viability of recycling. Here's a couple observations. We're still in the teens or higher back to my word, contamination prohibitives. The households putting the wrong thing in the container still. Really need to get it down below 10%. We're making slow progress there, but we're getting there. Garbage industry is taking back ownership of the education process. But to get into a long-term supply agreement to a CPG company who wants your bale, you got to get down into 5% or less contamination so that they can reliably run their process. You have to put technology in, and you have to get the ton per cost down. So the sensors are going in, the robotics are going in, and the modernization of this is happening, and big garbage is driving it. And you can see what the spend is across the 5 public companies right here. Waste Management's accelerating it, but they're all doing it at some level. And I think it'll take slow, a decade, fast, 5 years, and the vast majority of this is done. Okay, I have to talk about Russia and China. I'm not here to get into a political conversation. I just need to talk about things you need to keep in mind. Worldwide demand for oil is low 90 million barrels a day, 91 to 93 million. Pre any of this, you move that number, 500,000 barrels, you could change the price of oil $10 to $20 a barrel. Russia exports 4.9 million barrels a day. Well, they were trying to, until the sanctions came in. Last week, Russian oil, so the market was in the 120s. Russian oil couldn't get a bid at $80, except for a week ago Friday, Shell did. In fact, World Dutch Shell did buy Russian oil. And I think that was one of those, we're going to ask for forgiveness, not permission, because they bought a lot of oil really cheap. And then said, whoops, we shouldn't have done that. But that's being cynical. You can't displace that much oil and not massively change the price of oil. So you got to keep that in mind. And remember, 500,000 barrels can move the number $10, $20. You go and you're having a conversation at OPEC, and they're talking about producing more in the tune of less than 1 million and substantively moving the price of oil. This is going to be very disruptive. You're going to look at higher fuel costs for a long time. We could, in fact, resolve this if we drilled and produced more in the United States. We're at 11 million barrels a day. 4 years ago, we were at 15 million barrels a day. I'm not here to be political, but it's just baloney if somebody says you don't put more supply in the market, it doesn't lower the price. We can put more supply in the market. It's widely sought after oil because we produce some of the highest quality as far as how hard it is to crack it, oil. But let's talk about steel prices. China exports 33 million tons per day of steel. It's 10% of the world's exports. Now, we generate about 2 billion tons a year, but about 300 million of that is exported. The rest is consumed domestically. You can't move that much of the export market and not have a disruptive influence. And then lastly, Russia holds the fourth largest control of rare earth metals. Every single one of your cell phones, it's rare earth metals. Our defense industry is highly tied to rare earth metals. So we're in for a long haul. This is about where inflation's going. All right, I got to talk about China. So a couple things that I observed with regards to National Sword. What was the underlying why they were doing this? Was it a true commitment to, oh gosh, we got to internalize this more? I'm not saying it's not, but I think there was another piece of this. There's 400 million people in China that are in the middle class. We have 320 million people in the United States. Those 400 million people were demanding cleaner air and cleaner water. And on the air side, as you can see up here, almost 60% of the electricity is generated with coal. And if they were supplying themselves, they produce the dirtiest coal in the world out of Mongolia. So they're a huge importer of coal out of Australia, some from us. Then the Australians get mad at them because there's a political fight. They stop exporting. And that creates issues for China with regards to then how do you run highly intensive electricity-based industries like steel and aluminum. They're 50% of the world's production in steel and aluminum. You take that offline at some level, you're going to influence the price of steel and aluminum. They're 87% of the world's production on magnesium. You can't make aluminum from scratch without magnesium. Germany almost had to shut down their auto production last fall because China all through the fall was starting to rate power going into heavy intensive industries. In theory, they were doing this in front of COP26. They were going to go to COP26. They were going to pledge to embrace the standards out of what was happening in Scotland, only they found themselves in a real crisis and ultimately had to turn around to all their Mongolian coal mines and start digging as much as you can. They're all surface mines because they were going to come into their winter and not have enough coal to be able to power their own power plants for heat, and you'd start freezing people. So those were high-level things. But you go back to National Sword, they want clean air, clean water. Well, their paper industry is filthy dirty from a water standpoint. There are thousands of small plants that relied on mixed waste paper because you'll notice they banned mixed waste paper. They just reduced the percentage of corrugated based on the standard. And if I'm right, it was supposed to be 5. Might not have reduced it as much as you'd have thought. But they outright banned mixed waste. Why? They tried to starve those mills into closing. Now, at the time that this is going on, Xi Jinping is just coming into his power base, and this is critical. He can't go in and outright shut a whole industry down because all that foreign direct investment sits there and go, oh, geez, if they did that to their own, what would they do to me? And why would I put capital in there? This is Michael Hoffman's theory, okay? Roll forward 2018, his manifesto gets put into the Constitution of the country. He starts embracing a totally different economic model than you and I are used to in dealing with China from 1994 to, say, around 2017. This is a different China. If you're reading the news about the movie stars that disappear and all their wealth taken away, or you realize the level of imports of luxury goods going to China has come down dramatically, they are putting a iron hand grip on the control of that economy like you and I have never seen before. I cover industries that are in specialty distribution. Again, I'm not here conspiracy theorist of did they release it or not release the COVID, but there's no question it started there. There's no question that they hoarded masks and gloves from October to January, October of 19 through January of 20. All the companies I cover who distribute that material said, got all bought up by China. We have to think about them differently. You have to think about where your supply base is. You have to think about what the impact is on your cost of goods sold. You got to it's just a different perspective. You don't have to be radical about it. It's not I'm not an Asian culture issue. It's none of those things. This is simple math and economics. You just got to think about China differently. Things like the port issue. Bill talked about that. Typical cycles have been really, really fast is in the 60 days, but most of it's about 90 days, maybe up to 120 days. We're at 240 to 300 days cycle times. Now, one of the challenges is you started seeing pre the pandemic, then through the pandemic, a repositioning of production out of China into other sources. First started in Asia, then there's some reshoring going on, but the containers were in the wrong place. And there's no question the containers are in the wrong place. That exacerbates the problem. And then, unfortunately, we had political ramifications of government action domestically at the state level on economic cycles. And in California, basically California exacerbates the problem on the ports because they created such a social distancing issue, and then the unions jumped on it, and we ended up with this massive backlog of ships. If you want to be really cynical about it, California got tired of the news media standing on the shoreline in Long Beach and filming all the ships at anchor, so they changed the regulations, said you had to anchor 150 miles offshore, so you can't see the ships from shore anymore. Well, there's, at the worst case, it was 110 ships. We're in the 70s right now, but the normal number is like 6. There's never double digits. So we got a long way before this is going to correct. I don't think it corrects in 2022. I think we're into 23 before you start to see the spot prices, which are at $10,000 to $15,000 a container. These containers were normally you were shipping goods out of Asia between $1,250 to $2,500, depending on what was in it. This does not correct quickly. This is a structural part of inflation. And then on the U.S. wage issues and what's happening there from an inflation standpoint. So what is this data? This is terribly imprecise in the sense. It's interesting to look at. I wouldn't make decisions solely on it. But I've got data all the way back to 1872. It's coming from a group called Measuring Worth. And what they've done is they've plotted a correlation of the markets versus the trend in wages. And what you see is, when the markets and wages were kind of in line with each other, and then wages kept accelerated with a rising market, and then you have the Great Depression, then you saw wages improve post the Second World War into the 50s. Then you see a dip, again, another resurgence in the 70s, and then a long-term structural, and I'm not here to argue living wage, or you're supposed to have a $15 minimum wage number. I'm not making the case for that, but there is no question that if there's real validity to this data, we have to go to another level of analysis. Wages weren't keeping up with overall wealth creation in the country. That can't be sustained. That clearly has been exacerbated by what you've seen happen in 21 as the labor constraints. Let's be very clear. We have taken 2 to 5 million people out of the workforce permanently. One of the things the pandemic showed that if you were a 2-income family and the second income you thought you had to have because you'd had children or you had parental care issues or whatever that second income need was for, when the second income couldn't work during the pandemic, you discovered you didn't actually need the money, or you weren't making as much as all the things you were spending to be able to have the second income, like child care and what have you. So that piece of the workforce has come out. And then there's the group that retired but wanted to be active, 55 and older, who then has figured out during the pandemic, because they couldn't work, but they don't need the extra money, that they started doing extra interest. And that group of people have structurally come out of the workforce. They're gone. Wage inflation has been living between 2008 and 2020 at 2 to 3%. You should think about it as 4 to 6 structurally from now on. 6 a little high, but it's higher than the long-term average it's been for the last 15 years. Infrastructure bill. So there are a lot of fun things in there for us as an industry. I don't need to go through them in gory detail, but you can see that there's things that we really care about. So when do we see the money? I think some grant money could come out this year. EPA, principally around recycling. If they can get their act together from sort of a process, you could see some grant money, but most of this is going to show up in 23. So you should assume this is a 23 event. And then lastly, concluding, garbage is good. Inflation's here to stay. We'll settle at a higher low than we have historically. PFAS is an opportunity. Emissions should scare you to death if you run landfills. Get your hands around this measurement issue. Recycling is, big garbage is the savior of this. They'll spend the money. By the way, the comment I didn't make in there, I think we stay at 25% for a while, but we improve the quality of it dramatically. And then the next step up is organics, and somebody will figure that out. The supply chain does not ease in 22. It doesn't ease until 23. And the infrastructure bill is going to have money for all of us. Thank you.
That was a lot of information, and I don't know if I've ever seen anybody with so much enthusiasm and energy talk about solid waste and recycling. That was really impressive. I hope all of you have been writing down some questions for our panelists, because afterwards, when they're done, we'll have to take some time to answer those questions. Thank you, Michael. Next up, we have Jeff Blankman, who is here. And I hear that Jeff Blankman is the Sustainable Manufacturing Manager with McCormick Spice. And Marty Metro is going to be virtual.
I'm here if you can hear me.
We can hear you. I didn't know if we were going to see you too. So
You don't want to see me. No, I'm on vid. I'm here on video. I don't know if you can see me, but
we can
I
see
am
you now.
here.
Smile for us, Marty. Yay!
You see me?
Okay, we got Marty. Okay. So
Okay, great.
A little bit about Jeff. He's from Baltimore. He's a cyclist. He doesn't have any pets, but he rode from Seattle to Portland in one day, 205 miles. That's pretty significant. And Marty, the only thing I know about you is that you like vintage Volkswagens, which I think which is appropriate for your name, Marty Metro. So now we're going on to the sustainable portion of our discussion. Thanks.
Awesome. I can't see. I still see the sponsor screen. Is our screen up yet?
Yeah, our screen's back up.
Is that what he's supposed to see? I guess it doesn't really matter what he sees.
Yeah,
I'm
our
seeing
copy screen
Nancy
is back up, Marty.
and the sponsor screen. Maybe I'm frozen, but I can see myself, I can see Nancy, and I can see the sponsor screen.
Yeah, we got a couple of things with Zoom going on here. So if you guys, we'll try to get through it. He can't see the
Yeah,
screen,
so we
but
got
we'll
the screen up
try.
here, Marty.
Okay, well, let's get started. We'll jump right into it when maybe they can work on the screen so I can see it, but if not, Jeff's there. But I wanted to do a quick, whenever we are kind of in a row of speakers, I always like to take a minute and get a little stretch on and understand kind of who's in the room. I wanted to see if we could get 3 quick volunteers who aren't afraid to tell us a little bit about themselves in front of the room. Can we get 3 volunteers in the room? Again, I can't see, so Jeff has to be in my eyes. Jeff, can we identify 3 people, maybe people new to the industry, maybe people that are looking to network and meet people? This is a great way to introduce yourself, and then later in the session, people can come up and network with you. Jeff, can we identify 3 people?
All right, any takers?
Come on.
We got one.
We got 1, okay. Come on, can we get 3? 3 people. Anyone new to the conference has never been here before?
All right, we got a second.
Awesome, we got 2.
All right, we need one more.
1 more person. It'll be very helpful,
Okay,
I promise.
We got a third one. We got our 3.
Right. Okay, so I need 3 people. I need 3 first names. Jeff, if you can give me their first names.
Yeah.
I'm Andrew.
Andrew, in the back there. Martino and Brian.
Andrew,
Martino,
Martino, and
and
Brian. All right. Awesome. So thank you for volunteering. It'll be really should be painless. So I want to ask you just a couple of quick questions. And it'll help us get to know you and why you are here. So number 1, first question, and probably most important, what is your favorite donut? Number 2, why is it your favorite donut? Number 3, what is your role in what organization, if you are in an organization? And number 4, what would you like to get out of this session? So just those 4 quick questions: favorite donut and why? What is your role in your organization and what organization? And then really, why are you here? What are you trying to get out of this session? So let's go one by one. It'll help Jeff and I understand kind of who's in the audience, and we'll make the most of our session. So Andrew, what's your favorite donut?
Hey, good morning, everybody. My favorite donut is just a regular glazed I think. I don't eat many donuts, but I do like those.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. And what organization are with you, and what do you do in that organization?
I'm with American Fiber, and I'm a trader. I trade paper and plastic.
Awesome. And then you heard about McCormick Spice was going to talk about their landfill diversion, and you could have easily gone out and probably found a donut or gone on the coffee break. Why'd you stay in the session just now?
I'm here to learn and to network.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Martino, favorite donut?
Yeah, I'm not much of a donut eater as well, to be honest, but I think the chocolate glazed is my favorite. And just because it's not too rich, so that's why.
We have very traditional guys so far. And Martina, what organization are you with, and what do you do?
I work for Vippa. It's a Swiss company. We own MRFs in Europe, and we trade plastics and scrap metals and paper and all recyclables. And we trade new paper and stock lots and prime lots. And I'll stop boring everyone. We do lots of stuff. Recycling.
No, that's cool. No, this is really cool. And where are you based? Where are you physically based?
We have 2 offices in the U.S., one in Chicago and one in Brea, near Los Angeles, for the moment.
Okay, Brea. Okay, that's near me. And why did you not go look for a donut or coffee, and why did you stay when you heard about McCormick was going to talk about their program?
Because I got here a little too late to get drunk with everyone else, unfortunately, which I bitterly regret, and I'll make up for it tonight. So I was actually not hungover this morning. So
okay, good, perfect answer. I was going to say you can always make up for it tonight. Well, that's good. And I apologize, I can't read my own handwriting. The last person was Brian. Okay, I thought it was a P. I wrote down. Okay, and Brian. Same question. Come on, give me a good donut that you like.
Right. I'm going to go a little different here. So the apple fritter is a favorite.
Nice.
Oh, those are good too. Dunkin' Donuts.
Always got to be an apple fritter guy.
Nice.
Cool. And what organization are you with,
I
Brian?
can have it. Yeah. No, I'm with Henkel Corporation, Henkel is a pretty big corporation out of Germany, and they're split. So 50% of our business is adhesives. We're the largest adhesive manufacturer in the world. And then we also have consumer products, CPGs, as they were talked about earlier, such as Purex, Snuggle, Dial Soap, and so forth. But I represent the adhesives portion of our business.
Awesome. And what do you do, Brian?
So my role, I'm a business development director for circular economy and sustainability. And what we do is work with brands and converters to make sure that the adhesive is not a negative contributor to the recycling or composting portion of their business or their packaging. And the reason I'm here today is really to hopefully get to talk to some of the actual recyclers and the processors to see if there's any issues, any opportunities that an adhesive manufacturer or supplier might be able to help with.
Yeah, Brian. Full disclosure, our two organizations are working together in a couple of different plants. What's your last name, Brian?
Lawrence.
Lawrence. Okay, cool. I'll follow up with you afterwards. I think there's some things going back and forth. Good. Okay, well, let's,
Thanks, Marty.
this is helpful, super helpful. Got to get an idea of who's in the audience. Jeff, are you ready to roll? I'm not seeing you.
Yep.
But you can go ahead. I can't see the screen either, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Go for it.
Yep, I'm ready to go. So yeah, thanks for having me to the conference. I think, as we heard in the earlier presentation, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, is getting a lot more focus. So as someone that works in a consumer packaged goods company, hopefully I can give a little perspective about how recycling and sustainability is getting more focus in everything we do. I did, by the way, wear a different hat of packaging equipment, and I have bought Henkel adhesives before for some of our case packers. But anyway, when most people hear McCormick, they're very familiar with the name. They think of their pepper, their vanilla extract. We do own a lot of other brands, such as Frank's Red Hot, the French's Mustard, Zatter and Seasoned Rice Mixes. We also sell to other food service companies, restaurant chains and other manufacturers. So we had a previous CEO who liked to say that you probably have a McCormick product every day, whether you realize it or not. So as I mentioned, as a consumer packaged goods company, we have a lot of investors asking what we're doing for sustainability. We have our customers asking us, like Walmart, what do we do for sustainability? So it's, over the last 15 years, it's really grown considerably, our sustainability efforts. And we do have a specific recycling goal. It's part of our purpose-led performance program to divert at least 85% of our solid waste into an either recycling or a reuse stream. We just put out last month our most recent purpose-led performance report. In that report there, the screenshot there on the bottom right, you see the cardboard boxes there. There's a little blurb about our program with Used Cardboard Boxes and with Marty's team. So we started out, I met Marty about almost 15 years ago now at a green conference similar to this. We were both speaking. We struck a conversation and said, hey, maybe there's something you could do for McCormick in the way of, this is strictly around box reuse. So Marty came out to our flagship plant, took a look at all the different packaging. We were generating in our waste stream, and we generate a lot of cardboard boxes. This is the boxes that the bottles and caps come in that we pack the spices in. You know, some of our higher speed lines can generate an empty box in a matter of a few minutes, and then we've got dozens of lines at this particular facility. So we ended up setting up with Used Cardboard Boxes a reuse program as opposed to a recycling program where we're bailing up as OCC. It was a big win-win. You know, we got financially more value for the used box versus a recycled box. It's good for the environment to reuse the box versus recycling, and of course it's better than, you know, keeping it out of a landfill both financially and environmentally. So that was a big success, but it was only one success at one plant for one waste stream. We ended up leveraging, here's some of the other, showing some of the outlets. We ended up leveraging the program with UCB and expanding it to our entire America's supply chain division, which is now 15 sites. And instead of just limiting ourselves to used cardboard boxes, we were working with the UCBZeroWaste division of their company and looking at all the different commodities at a number of different sites. So things like drums, pallets, super sacks, really anything that's in the waste stream that could ultimately be diverted from a landfill and captured. We are now looking at multiple sites, one by one, kind of systematically going through all the streams. And this is important too for someone like McCormick. I mean, we're worried about how much labor we put into our spices. We're worried about getting spices out the door. What's happening at the trash dock is off our radar. So we really need a third-party company like UCB to partner with to help us investigate all these different opportunities. We would flounder if it was up to us to try to handle all these different streams. With, you know, our purchasing folks are worried about purchasing bottles and caps. They're not worried about getting top dollar, best value for a plastic waste. So the big thing we do, the best way to describe the program is it's a hierarchy that we go through. Where the first thing we want to look at is, you know, obviously the highest value opportunities, the reuse opportunities. So if it's something that we're recycling, can we reuse it and get a better value for it? If it's something that's going in the trash, can we at least get it out of the trash stream and recycle it, which is less value than reuse, but better than the trash. And then, of course, you know, the worst option, what we do when we have to is, you know, send stuff to the landfill, which we'd still send quite a bit to the landfill. One thing I did want to point out, I mentioned we do have a solid waste goal. Our target, the 85% target, you know, I had thought years ago that it's just a matter of will. If you have the will and the cost you're willing to pay, you can recycle anything. It's actually a little more difficult than that. We do have some streams that are just really difficult to get out of a trash stream. Things like organic waste with a lot of salt in it. You know, no compost facility wants to take anything with salt. So that's an example where we have trouble. We have some contaminated products, like some pails at one of our plants is full of residue. So the pail people don't want it. It's a mess to clean out. So it's not quite as easy to recycle as we thought. So that 85% target is actually a pretty aggressive target. We're only about 3/4 of the way there so far. So now I'll turn it over to Marty, and he can talk a little more about their program and how they approach, what they do with McCormick, how they approach that with all their customers.
Thanks, Jeff. It's funny, just as you were finishing up, Jeff, the audio got very strange. Can you guys hear me okay, loud and clear?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to keep going. I'm kind of going blind here, so I can't see. So Jeff, if you don't mind being the mouse clicker. Before we go forward, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind going back, if you can go back to slide 5, or actually 4, can you do that? With the different outlets?
The one before.
You there with the 3 different outlets for boxes?
That one. This is the box reuse slide.
Sorry, David, the audio just got so crazy I can barely hear Jeff. I don't know what just happened. Everything was fine up until about 1 minute ago.
So we have the box reuse slide up?
Yeah, there we go. Okay. And you do have it up, Jeff, right?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so I just want to back up because Jeff mentioned some really good stuff, but I want to also add a couple of comments from my perspective. So, Jeff said, we met many years ago, and our company was started in 2006, really to build a reuse market for cardboard boxes, and McCormick was a perfect example. If you think about the traditional McCormick spice product from the outside, you think about this clear plastic bottle and this, infamous red cap. There we go. Now, David, I can see the screen. Thank you. So 15 years ago, we met with McCormick and we talked about the fact that they keep unpacking the same exact bottles and the same exact caps 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that there was definitely opportunities to resell them as boxes, not just as scrap cardboard. So we did really 3 things. The first thing we did is we started to sell them to consumers as moving kits. And that was really the beginning of our business in 2006. And it's really funny because we work with lots and lots of big companies. McCormick is one of them. But we work with a lot of big food, beverage, and CPGs. And we always get the comment, well, yeah, some of our employees use these boxes for moving. Like when they have to move, they'll come in and grab some boxes off the production line. And we said, yeah, exactly. You get it. We can do that on a massive scale. So it's not just a couple of employees, it's anyone in the country. So the first thing we did was we built moving kits out of industrial bottle and cap boxes. And it's a great business, and it still stands 15 years later. The second thing we did is, there's a lot of boxes, right? There's only so many people in the country that are moving, but a company like McCormick Spice, let alone the Cokes and the Pepsis of the world, they're unpacking bottles and caps all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's an enormous amount of boxes. So we started marketing those boxes by the truckload. And we provide them to huge companies like, as big as Walmart and Walgreens. They buy used boxes by the tractor trailer load for low cost distribution. It's not, the concept is very easy. Oh, buy boxes for more than recycling, sell boxes for less than retail or wholesale. Very easy concept. It's obviously a lot more complicated. You've got so many different dimensions of length and width and depth and cubic volume. You've got conveyor belts. You've got obviously the logistics of sorting them and inspecting them. You can't just send a bunch of crappy boxes to Walmart and expect them to be happy and order again. So you have to set up sorting centers and quality control and so forth. The big thing we did though is we built software, and we built that software and it's pretty sophisticated software that does geo-matching of the length, the width, the depth. We find the length, the width, the depth that McCormick is unpacking, and we match it geographically with a company that needs a similar length, width, and depth. Then we do the sorting, the inspection, and all that good stuff. As we built that software, our software got more robust, our quality control got more robust, and what we worked with McCormick on, they are already well aware of the concept of returning their boxes back to their vendors. And what's the best company to buy a box that was designed for that company's products? Well, McCormick's vendors like to get their own boxes back if they can get them back cost effectively, and of course under a food grade quality control program. So we built all 3 of these outlets, either moving kits, big retailers that buy our boxes by the truckload, or McCormick's original vendors that want their own boxes back under a food grade quality control program. And we built the software to track that. And we've been doing it for 15 years now. Jeff, if you can go to the next slide that you already covered, but the point was McCormick was very instrumental in us expanding our own business. We were already, I think it's fair to say, we were the largest used box processor in North America and processing millions and millions and millions of used boxes. But McCormick, as Jeff said, was busy. I mean, they're a multi-billion-dollar manufacturer. They weren't really that focused on the rest of their waste. They were super impressed with what we were able to build, our software, our tracking, our quality control functions all across the country. But they were only benefiting from that with boxes. So when we partnered with McCormick and started looking at all the other things, the barrels, the drums, the pallets, the super sacks, and we started to take that same approach that we took for 15 years to look at boxes, we actually created this new entity called UCBZeroWaste. And that's what Jeff referred to. UCBZeroWaste has partnered with McCormick on a national, actually all of North America, not just to look at boxes, but to look at every single commodity and go through what Jeff just discussed, which is, are there reuse opportunities like the boxes? And there are for super sacks and barrels and drums and pallets, of course. And then what are what's really happening with the recycling and how can it be improved? I want to walk you through how we literally step by step go through the improvement process. So Jeff, if you can go to the next slide. Oh, I see there's some animations in there. Yeah, there we go. So we have what we call a 6-step proven process. And let me just pull it up on my side. It doesn't seem like it's rocket science, but if you don't do it the right way, you're not getting the full benefits available to you. So I'll give it to you in a high level. First thing we do is we go inside of a factory. We always like to say, if you're trying to solve a recycling or a waste problem from outside, you're probably missing a lot of the opportunity. So the first thing we do is we go inside. We walk the lines, we review the CAD drawings, we identify where the waste is actually coming from. And I've been doing this for 15 years. Prior to that, I was an SAP consultant working in food manufacturing. So 10 years before that. So I've been doing this for about 25 years. And it's fascinating. You walk the lines of a multi-billion-dollar manufacturer and you start to see where the waste is coming from. Because we all know most food manufacturers, there really isn't waste. The waste comes when it gets combined, when two different things get combined. So the first thing we do is identify where the waste is coming from. The second thing we do is, and this is always challenging, can we create systems and processes inside the factory so that things don't get combined? Because it's often that, we'll just use McCormick, it's often that you've got a clear plastic bottle that maybe something fell on the floor, maybe something got rejected, it's a clear plastic bottle, it's perfectly recyclable. But often a plastic bottle that maybe got rejected later in the line or in the process has some spices in it. Well, if those two commodities go in the same bin, the value of the first clear bottle just got diminished because now it has food waste in it. So of course, very simple. We look to find opportunities to keep things separate. Once we keep things separate inside, then that's when we go outside. That's step 3. Step 3 is when we look at the equipment, right sizing the equipment, the containers, the vehicles that carry that equipment, the schedules for those vehicles. Again, often there is equipment purchased, then 2 years later, lines are changed, product mixes are changed, and the equipment is no longer applicable or no longer optimal for that. So we're always looking to look at the equipment, the vehicle, the vehicles that move them and how they're moved. Once we identify how we can keep things separate, how we can right size the equipment, we then start educating and training the people at the company. We do signage and such inside the facility. We color code things where everybody knows. I like to say it doesn't matter if you're the janitor or the CEO. When you walk through a factory line, you should be able to see these items go in these bins, and these bins make us money, and these bins cost us money. Once we've got that program growing, we've trained everyone, and the systems are in place, and we're seeing the material flow correctly, that's when we go out and work with the vendors. So many times companies will go ask their vendors for a price first. We don't like to go asking vendors, or whether it's a hauler, an equipment provider, a recycler, we don't like going to talk with vendors based on a theory and then try to meet the things that we said might happen. We actually like to put the program in place first. We like to try to reduce the contamination first, right-size the equipment first, really understand what the quality and the material and the volume that's going to be outputted first, then go talk to the vendors to get the correct rates. It minimizes confusion, minimizes fees, contamination fees, light hauls, all that good stuff, because we actually know what we can actually commit to what we're sharing with the vendors and the haulers. And then finally, the last step is what we believe is the most important step, is the continuous improvement. And the way we do that is with the software. Our software tracks everything, not just the boxes, but all commodities. And if you can move to the next slide, the software that we built really in cooperation with McCormick is called Water. And I didn't realize the animations are still in there. If you can click a couple times and get the whole word water down the left side. There we go. And what a little bit further, it tells you what it stands for. So it stands for Waste Analytics and Tracking for Environmental Reporting. And what Water is it combines my background in software, my first 10 years in life in software, and my second 15 years in life in waste management and waste reduction. And we put the two together, and our software tracks every commodity that goes out of a facility and multiple facilities. So if you go to the next slide, gives you some screenshots of the software. We believe it's some of the most powerful, most advanced software out there. McCormick does as well, because of course they chose us to run all of their plants for North America. But the one thing the software does is provide you a real-time dashboard. Again, each vendor that you work with probably has some type of reporting software. What Water does is combines all of that data together into one snapshot. In the case of McCormick, all of their plants across North America, there was well over 100 different vendors that were supplying some type of waste recycling reuse related service. 100 different vendors providing all of their invoices. Some were electronic, some were paper, some were spreadsheets, some were, you name it. What Water does is takes all of those different invoices and puts them into one reporting software that's real time. And as you can see on the left side, shows you your landfill diversion at all times. On the top left, it also shows you some key metrics, such as the cost of your program. This is all sample data. We weren't going to show you all the details of McCormick, but this is just sample data of what our clients see real time. Next slide.
And I would just like to throw in, if you had seen what we were doing previously to track all our results, we got that 85% diversion rate goal. Every plant had their own spreadsheet where people are manually importing invoices from a recycler here and a trash hauler there, and they're adding up all the tonnages, and they're entering it into a master spreadsheet. And then you got 15 sites all have 15 different spreadsheets that they're manually looking up invoices. So this really simplified our data collection, and not only that made it easier, but it's more accurate too. Just as important. So the accuracy and the simplicity of gathering our data, having one software platform, it was a big benefit to the program.
I thought that you said that, Jeff, and it came out of your mouth, because it is fascinating when big Fortune 500 companies show us their data and they go, I think we have a pretty good handle on things. Here's the data. And they show us a spreadsheet. And then we go into the formulas within the cells of the spreadsheet and we say, well, you do realize this formula has a minor problem in it that's causing your data to be completely incorrect. And most companies don't, again, have better things to do than be looking at formulas on spreadsheets. But when you have so many different plants all consolidating up, it's very, very easy to have one little formula in your spreadsheet screw everything up. So, so yeah, as Jeff just said, what we did is we built software that creates a real-time pie chart for each location, and then for corporate, all of those pie charts and all of that data gets consolidated into a master pie chart for the entire organization for whatever geography you want to include. So the next slide is an important thing that we have learned. And really this software was built based on 15 years of lessons learned. Can't tell you how many times, and if you work in a manufacturing facility, you'll know, can't tell you how many times somebody walks in and you know, it's wrapping up at C shift and they go, wow, the truck's almost full. I'm gonna go ahead and request a swap. So they request a swap, but it's C shift, so the service provider doesn't see it. A shift comes in and says, oh God, I got a busy A shift. I can see the trailer's almost full. I'm gonna request a swap. So then they request a swap, and then what happens? You get two different trailers showing up to pick up one, two different trucks showing up to pick up one trailer. What we did is we created a queue for all your trailer swaps. So you can see what has been requested, what has been picked up. Sometimes it has to be picked up, you know, at McCormick's biggest facility, we probably swap 2 to 3 times a day. At some of the smaller facilities of companies that we work with, you know, we can swap once a month. Very important to see when the trailers were requested and when the truck actually comes. Excuse me. So if you go to the next slide, I like to always remind people, again, there is software out there that's reporting software. And what happens is people take their Excel spreadsheets and then they dump them into reporting software and they make very fancy pie charts. That is great and it looks pretty, but keep in mind, if your spreadsheets have inaccurate formulas, and you know, no disrespect to people who are managing waste programs, but they're generally not Excel spreadsheet masters, or many of them aren't, you can now have very pretty reports with completely inaccurate data. So what our software does is ensures that the actual logistics, the swaps, the trailer, all the logistics are done in our software, and then all of the actual data is pulled from the actual invoices from the vendor. We don't have that spreadsheet middle layer. Next slide. I want to make sure I can see where we are here. So next slide, actually you can go advance one more slide. We built our own software from 15 years of managing waste programs, and we love color coding. So everything we do is color coded. Reuse is green, recycling is blue, waste to energy yellow, landfill red. We always like to have landfill red. Red, the international symbol for stop. Stop landfilling things if you don't need to landfill them. We associate dollars with our colors. Green and blue should be revenue numbers. Red, of course, is a cost number. So as you can see in our software, costs are always going to be red. Revenue is always going to be black. We want to remind everybody at any level of any organization, when you see a red number, your company is spending money. When you see a black number, your company is making money. Next slide. Actually, same thing. So let's go on to this, what I call the Swiss cheese report. We were with a very, very big, you know, world-leading food manufacturer, and we were at one of their plants doing an actual live audit, and we had all of their invoices, and we're putting their invoices in, and we're entering it into water, and we're showing them their actual landfill diversion in real time. And we get to their barrels and drums, and this is not McCormick. I'll refrain from the name, but this is not McCormick. They had already published their landfill diversion in their annual report, and we were validating that with our software. And we're putting all their invoices in, and we said, hey, we're almost done. This, I think, was 2019. We're almost done, but we don't have your invoices for your barrels and drums. And the plant manager said, oh, yeah, we don't get invoices. We have a deal with the barrel and drum provider. If they can sell them, they don't charge us. Only when there's too much food residue and they can't sell them, that's when they charge us, and that's when they send us a bill. So if we don't have a paperwork, it means we weren't charged. And I said, well, I've been in this industry for a long time. I get it. I understand that relationship. But we still have to have paperwork for the weight. And they said, no, I told you there's no paperwork. If they pick them up, it's kind of a deal we have. If they pick them up and they can sell them, they get them for free. It's a wash. And we explained to them, yeah, it's a wash financially, but landfill diversion is not just based on finance. It's based on weight, the weight you're diverting. And without actual reports of the weight every single pickup, your landfill diversion numbers are incorrect. And in this case, they were not as good as they could have been because they were diverting from the landfill, but they weren't getting the information from their vendor. They didn't think they needed it. So what water does is helps track every single vendor every single month to make sure we get the weights, W-E-I-G-H-T, no matter what the financials were. So that's a very, very powerful piece of the software that we built in. And then the last slide on water is the actual invoices. So what we do is we make sure that every single vendor provides every single invoice, whether it be an invoice or a statement, and every single one is scanned into the software. So, depending on what the mix of the room is, it's amazing. I'm sure there's people in the room where you want to get an invoice from last year, or you want to see what you spent from last year, or you want to compare last year to this year, or you just want to check on the rate on an invoice. Sometimes in these big Fortune 500 manufacturing firms, there's no way to find those invoices. We don't know. It was processed, it was paid, it was archived. Well, what water does is make sure that every single vendor, every single month, gets the paperwork, gets scanned, and you can actually pull it up. So if you want to see the actual invoice, you click on the little green check, and boom, the actual scanned invoice pulls up so that you can actually see it, download it, and so forth. So what water really is software, real time, that was built to do the things we've been doing for 15 years. All of the logistics, all of the trailer swaps, all of the inventory, invoice auditing, all of the color coding of revenue versus expenses, all of the pulling out the different fees to understand, and really being able to look real time and of course monthly to build continuous improvement processes to improve. It is so fascinating how many times a big Fortune 500 company will put in a program, make adjustments, consider those adjustments fixed, and literally a month later, it all goes to crap because markets change, product mixes change, logistics change, freight rates change, you name it. And what looks to be a program that was, quote, fixed is now literally 30 days later, a very inefficient program. So what water does and what UCBZeroWaste attempts to do with companies like McCormick is have a real-time, ongoing, always audited, always reported sustainability program that everybody can be proud of. So that's really what we are all about. Jeff and I talked about this. We've been working together for many, many years. We wanted to share with you what we do. We wanted to share with you the successes we've had at McCormick, going from a small program focusing on boxes to really focusing on every single commodity across all of their plants in North America. But we really wanted to, answer any questions and talk with you. So we met Brian and Martino and Andrew, but we kind of want to stop here and ask if there's any questions, if we can share some stories, if we can give some guidance, we'd love to. I'll turn it over to you, Jeff, because I can't see.
Yep. So were you waiting till the end for any questions and doing that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So does anybody have any questions or comments or feedback? Well, one thing that I want to look at it to show here is one of our other really challenging waste streams is finished good waste. So, we have product in a warehouse that it goes past shelf life or it becomes obsolete. Maybe it was something that was co-packed for another customer and then they discontinue the brand, so it's obsolete inventory. And trying to depackage finished good waste is, extremely costly and labor intensive. And so that's one of our most challenging waste streams if we're going to hit that 85% waste diversion goal. We found some markets where we've had companies who can depackage it at a reasonable cost, still cheaper than landfill. And then we've had other markets where, for example, one place we have glass bottles, and it's just prohibitive to try to depackage a glass bottle. And and sort out the organic material inside from the packaging.
Yeah, by the nature of depackaging, it's not like you have ongoing depackaging needs of the same exact product, right? Depackaging is generally because of some type of error that happened or some type of, like you said, obsolete package. So what happens is the cost of investigating the option often outweighs the benefits. So in a big company, it's like, well, this happened once. What am I going to do? Spend the next month trying to find out how to depackage this plastic bottle? So it is really, really challenging because of the nature of the beast. The depackaging is always different. It's usually at a different geography each time, different product, different package, different reasons. So it's very, very challenging. There's no such thing as a one solution fits all depackaging, right?
Yep.
Any questions in the room? Is anyone left in the room?
So there's people. There are people here. How about just questions for anyone on the panel? Are there any representatives from any of the large waste companies that Michael was referencing earlier in the room? Well, I have a question, Michael. You mentioned that the large waste companies were taking ownership back on trying to reduce the contaminants or prohibitives in the curbside waste stream. And you mentioned that Waste Management is spending $800 million on MRFs. Can you tell us what other opportunities, what other things that they're doing that we'll see that will impact us?
Well, first, from a Wall Street perspective, I often run into that they're all married to their landfills because they're such high incremental operating leverage. Bring a ton of waste in, you get 60 to 90% margins. And my response to that is that's actually not accurate. They care about controlling the waste at the loading dock and the curb. And as long as they control that waste, whatever the customer wants them to do with it, they'll do with it. Their message back is that I just have to generate a reasonable return on the capital you want me to put into it. So recycling, they're all in on recycling. And not because somebody's stood on a political platform and says that we have to do this. They're working tirelessly to make recycling a good return on capital business. And they would tell you between 2000 and 2017, but for 2 years inside that, it was actually a very good return on capital business. It was a relatively stable commodity environment all in all, and their costs were manageable. And then National Sword happens, and they finally say, I got to stop being in the commodity game. I think the biggest issue for the industry is the contamination at the curb. And that's about consumer education. And what they didn't do in the 80s is when all of the politicians were running for, we're going to put recycling in, they just went, okay, fine, and never really thought about it. And now they're thinking about it hard, and they gave up the education, control of the education. I think what you all should care about is having a dialogue with them about empowering them with incremental data that helps them go back to the consumer with, by the way, if you buy these products or these products, this is what they do with it. But for them to do that, we need the quality to be here. And so people stop looking at the multi-layered packaging and go, oh, that's plastics, and stick it in. And we'll get there eventually, but we're not there yet for that material.
Are there any other questions? Yes?
Michael, you talked about the wage issue, lost employees. How many lost employees did you say before?
So out of the total, not just the waste industry, out of the total labor market, there's 3 to 5 million people have come out of the labor pool permanently. This data will get better. The quality of that data, that's why you can drive a truck between 3 and 5 million. But just as the people who study these things get better at the capture of it, but there's an absolute conclusion without doubt that we have a permanent reduction in the labor pool.
Michael, how would immigration impact that number? Where you said the wages were going down, and with the the quality of labor that's coming across the border is lower end labor, manual labor. Would that have an impact on what you were?
Yeah, so I think there's at a very simple level, three forms of capital. There's money, data, and people, or labor. We have highly regulated ways to move money and data around the world in the United States, and most developed countries do. We do not have a sophisticated manner in which to allow labor to move. We need absolutely need a national immigration policy, immigration reform, and this isn't about an argument of there's some number of people who are in the country illegally and they've got to be allowed to just stay. It's a bigger issue than that, far bigger than that. There are jobs that do not get filled because there's not a body. Forget the skills. There's just not a body. And immigration reform has got to be part of that conversation.
Any other questions? Our friend Brian, he likes apple fritters.
I guess everybody knows me now.
And he's buying tonight,
Yeah.
clearly, because
if anybody knows a good
spot.
spot, right? Exactly. Thanks. But quick question. So you mentioned obviously technology is a big part, right? And we've talked about we're moving along that step. In the robotics that are out there now are definitely farther, pretty far along that process. On the scheme of things, I mean, would you say we're at the beginning phase, at the end of phase? I mean, where do you see technology coming in to help in this process as far as, how we process and sort? It could be for anybody. It doesn't have to be Mike.
So I would say we're at early maturity. We're beyond that first phase, but we're a long way from full implementation. We've made a lot of gains. When the disc screen came around in the 90s, that was a
Sure.
landmark thing. So we're moving along, but we're still got a long ways to go.
Gotcha.
So if I used a baseball analogy and followed that along, I'd say we're in the beginning and middle innings. So as an industry, garbage is, if a score of 1 to 10 is best in class is a 10 on using technology, data, big data, broadly, just to run their businesses, we're better than 5, but we've got, but then the companies, it differs across the companies. Like I think Republic is ahead of everybody, and they're more like a 7 or 8, and others are better than a 5, but still have room for improvement. So there's that part of it as well. And one of the companies is just moving to the cloud, and it's a big company. The other thing that's happened is the technology's gotten cheap enough that you get past the barrier of it's a step function increase in the capital spending. And then I think the software as a service companies have gotten smarter about how to sell it, as opposed to you're buying an enterprise-wide license to allow these companies so that you then incorporate all the little guys can come in this and play it too. Can you get them in on a subscription basis and bring this in? There's no question that I'm holding up a device. This device has changed the way we're supposed to interact, and the pandemic, took that to a whole nother level. So you have to figure out that connectivity between your back office, your truck, and your customer at all levels, whatever business you're in. And I think garbage is making progress there. They've got a lot of room for improvement.
So just to follow up on that, so Marty and Jeff, I'm assuming the water technology that you have, is that a homegrown system, or is that something, I mean, did you use cardboard boxes to create that?
Yeah. So great question. My background was SAP, so I spent about almost a decade building SAP systems for manufacturing firms before I started the used cardboard boxes business in 2002, really. So when we started buying and selling boxes, we started to build software for ourselves. We didn't use like a CRM system. We built our own because, as simple as it sounds, there's a length, a width, a depth that causes all kinds of changes in what the marketability of something is. And then there's, of course, the geography. You can't have a box in San Diego and sell it to a company in New York and make a profit. So we built the software for the boxes, and it became very, very robust. And then, as we were mentioning, a couple of years ago, we realized, wow, our software is very powerful for boxes, but nobody seems to be tracking everything else. So the box software is really a matching software. It matches supply and demand for length, width, depth, and geography, and volume, and all that good stuff. The water software is really the logistics and the reporting. So it's two completely different pieces of software. And the water is completely web-based. So it's designed to help large companies track all of their vendors in one place.
Right, which I think that's the way everybody is going, and it seems like they're all homegrown too.
Yeah, again, not to get on my soapbox, but yes, there's a lot of software companies out there that can build amazing software, and they can build amazing graphics and amazing pie charts and all that good stuff. But if you don't understand what you're doing, you don't understand why you're building the software, you don't understand what is needed, you're just building something fancy on top of flawed logic. So we spend a lot of time building the software with our clients for the real reasons that they need. Like Jeff said, you can build very fancy software that just pulls your Excel reports and makes them pretty, and you just have really pretty, really inaccurate reports. So we do it from an industry background as well. And that's why we're not trying to build software for every other industry. This is the industry we know.
That's excellent. Okay. Are there any other questions? One more up here.
Two real quick. Michael, did you see the hole-in-one on 17 yesterday at the TPC? And I'd love to hear more about the greenhouse gas emissions from the landfills you were talking about. And even if they're harvesting the gas, is there still an emissions issue?
No, I didn't. Actually, I was riding my horses, and then I was traveling here. And I was out at the Open on Friday, and I missed the hole-in-one on 16 at now the WM Open. But if any of you, if you're a golfer, you've got to go to 16 at some point in your life. You've never seen anything like it. So the issue is the ESG from an asset management standpoint was the area of the highest growth in dollars under an asset management category. So if a prospectus is saying what is some of our drivers of what we're going to do, ESG is now the hot theme, and a lot of money chasing the subject. So with it, companies all around the world are being challenged to measure and report what's known as scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So scope 1 is your direct emissions, and that's where the landfills fall. And so the analysis, early on when the U.S. investors were going, oh, it must be your fleet, and then ultimately they start reporting, and you discover 85 to 90% of your scope 1 emissions are your landfill gas if you're integrated. And the challenge you have is the way that's calculated or reported is using the EPA method, which is a calculation, not a measurement. And it has these flaws in it because you should be doing if you're managing your gas responsibly, you got basically 3 choices. You flare it, you do low BTU, or you do high BTU. High BTU is under renewable gas, renewable fuel. 87% of gas conversion into energy not flared is low BTU. We generate 11 million megawatt hours of power sold as baseload energy into the grid from landfill gas. Up until 5 years ago, it was the highest amount of megawatt hours renewable energy other than hydroelectric was produced as baseload power. Solar and wind are not sold as baseload power. They're sold as peaking power because the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow always when you need it. And we still haven't figured out bulk energy storage. So the issue you get above what are you doing with the gas, and you just talk about how is this scope 1 to be addressed as an aggregate number. You as a public company or a private company, you're more and more pressures on showing a path on how you reduce it. And it's more about the plan for reduction, then it's here and you're telling me it's going to be at some number lower. It's just proof that you can annually work on reducing it. And the challenge for the garbage guys is twofold from my view. The responsible measurement and responsible management of it is you're going to put more wells in your landfills, pull more gas out, and do things with it. The problem is that you're penalized in the calculation for doing that because it means you generate more fugitive emissions. So there's a clear admission EPA's process has to change. My fear is what I was alluding to, is that garbage should own that change by collecting a lot of data, being able to share that data, and then say, this is the best way to do this. Don't let a third party do that for you. Where that fear goes is at some state level, people are going to hone in on the super emitter aspect of this, and you start getting outright banning a landfill, or you won't get permit expansions, and you ultimately start closing the capacity, which is just going to raise the prices. And I'm not here to promote landfill, but it's still the single most least expensive way per ton to dispose of our waste, and it's a highly engineered method. Now, there are alternatives, and there's a willingness to pay, that's clear, but it's still the least expensive way to do it. So, all of this is going to have a social cost that we all have to agree we're going to pay. So closing the loop on your question is the garbage guys need to come up with a measurement method that they're willing to stand behind and that the public will accept, take the risk that the numbers are what they are, and then come up with a clear plan how you lower your emissions consistently over time. And it's all about the fugitive piece. And they're getting better and better. It's daily cover, it's how you manage that open face, it's do you pull a permanent cap over the site on a continual basis. All of those are part of that model, all of which they have to do anyway. It's just a question of when and what. Are you using geosynthetics or instead of dirt? All of that, that's all being thought about. If they don't own the measurement method, though, I fear that they're going to find themselves in a position where they may lose control of the asset. That's my fear.
Okay, thank you all very much. I want to thank our technology guys. You guys did a great job. This is a new world that you're managing, so thank you for that. Thank you to our panelists. They'll be here for just a few minutes if you guys have other questions. And then I also want to make sure that everyone goes next door into the exhibit hall for the break to spend some time with the exhibitors. And thank you for your attention today. Good job, guys.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Good job, Michael.
Thank you.
I like the point about public education, grabbing that back, because early on curbside there was a lot of it, and then it just stopped.
Yeah, the garbage guys, I think, just
And they're the ones getting the stuff, so why not have
yeah,
them?
they made the mistake of, I think it was more benign neglect. I think they just sort of went, oh, I'll let them worry about it.
Yeah, well, it was like everyone was gonna do
Yeah,
this.
so are we buying it from?
And that's my example of, if you don't own this thing on the emissions, you're gonna have the same thing happen to you as
Same
you did,
thing,
all over again.
You're the recipient of the material.
Yep,
Okay.
So
exactly.
they would be like the umbrella. We'd be paying.
You know, I saw your name with a different sort of
Checks would go to them, and all the results
You're from
get
Massachusetts?
compiled by UCB. But as
Right.
far as the choice of vendors, it's not like they pick all the vendors. They're not a recycling themselves. They just
Right, well, we buy boxes from them. So, yeah, that's interesting. Do you have?
Electronics. I saw your name on the list, I said, isn't it?
Oh, my gosh.
But anyway,
Who comes to a
we
conference
could
and doesn't
easily be
bring
working, buying recyclables, and then
Uh-huh.
it would just be going through UCB to collect all the data.
Very interesting.